Hello, good evening everybody. My name is Peter Wainwright and I'm your host for this evening's webinar, which runs until 8 o'clock. The topic of tonight's webinar is on the screen there, staying on the right side of public opinion and how to avoid controversy, which I think would be very, very popular with all of you. So thank you for all turning up. I have two panelists, two experts in this area, and I'll introduce them briefly and get them just to say hi before we move on to how the webinar unfolds. Got Dr. Bjorn Klies and Sonia Siraz. Bjorn is a senior lecturer at the Open University Business School. He has extensive experience in supply chain management, but also looking at across the organization. He's worked in a number of different cultures and settings and has been heavily involved in the MBA program. Sonia is from the IE Business School in Spain, also an international fellow at the Open University Business School. And you can see from both their bios, and if you look at Sonia's bio, you can see she's done a lot of work into this topic of legitimacy and legitimation, illegitimacy, etc. My role here is as host. I'm an alumni from the Open University Business School. I also teach on the MBA program, and I run a small consultancy looking at strategy, innovation, and creativity. So let's move on to say hello to Bjorn. A couple of words from you, and then Sonia.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Bjorn Klaas. I'm, as you said, Peter, I'm a senior lecturer at the Open University in operation management, but since some time I'm actually looking very much in these issues of legitimacy, and it's, as you will see tonight, an absolutely fascinating topic. So I'm looking forward to tonight's session.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bjorn. And Sonia, hello.
Well, welcome, everyone. I'm Sonia Siraz, as Peter presented. I'm passionate about legitimacy, so I'm looking forward to a very interactive discussion. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I can see lots of you have started to get going in the chat, so do feel free to use that. So let's have a quick look at what we're going to be doing tonight. The objective really is to share some of the insights from the masterclass that was held in Manchester. Obviously, it's a short snippet of that wider program. And secondly, for you to gain some insights into the importance of this topic of legitimacy within an organizational context. So encourage you to share your stories and insights, and I hope you go away with some ideas about how you can use this to enhance your practice. Okay, the agenda is, well, we've met the panel. How you can pose questions, it's very simple, really. Just use the chat. If you've got a specific question for the panel that you want answering, we'll try and pick that up. I can't guarantee we will respond to every question, but we might try and combine one or two together. There's no audio participation by you as attendees, just myself and the panel. But we're going to be using the chat to help feed the discussion. Bjorn will shortly be giving us an overview of that masterclass, and then you can see the structure of the evening, where we have a video of several minutes, and then a poll and discussion, and we repeat that 3 times. So we're covering quite a broad scope of the topic. And then we'll summarize and close, and we aim to finish exactly at 8 o'clock. So let's move on to the overview of this session on the 26th of May. And I'll go to you, Bjorn. Could you just give us an introduction to this, and particularly what is this topic, this word legitimacy?
Well, yeah, so this session in Manchester was actually a session on a series of sessions that we did both in England and abroad, because we've been with the same topic to Dublin and we've been to Germany. And this topic is all about how we as individuals view organizations or even people or activities, and how we make up their mind with them. And so it's all about what we do. What do we think about whether a particular activity, a particular organization is good in our opinion. And then it's all about, you know, how do we deal with that? How do we express that? And what action do we take on that? You could, for example, think of the activity of fracking, and there's a lot of us. I mean, we have people from Romania, we have people from the UK, we have people from all over the place now attending, and we all have different kind of views on whether this should be allowed or not. And that is really what we are going to look at in this session, because this all comes down: is this particular activity, is this particular person, is this particular organization legitimate or not?
Right. Okay, that sounds great. Well, we'll soon find out. So I'm going to ask our technical expert, Bill from Workcast, please to move us on to video 1, please.
Legitimacy is important. And let me give you the academic definition of what legitimacy actually is. And it's a very simple, straightforward definition. It is the generalized perception or assumption that the actions of an entity, a company, a government, an industry, or even a person, a CEO, remember Sepp Blatter, are desirable, proper, appropriate within some socially constructed system of norms, values, and beliefs. It's not according to the law. We're not talking about legality here. We're talking about legitimacy here. There is no fixed law according to which you can actually assess this. It is all about your perception. What you think of something is desirable or not. And so measuring of legitimacy is important for the survival of the entity that we're talking about in that society in which it operates. And so we need to assess this from 2 perspectives. From the evaluator's perspective, you as a person, you as a member of this society, who looks at the activities and the things that happen in the society and makes a judgment about that. But also from an evaluee's point. You as the one under scrutiny. In the job that you work, in the activity that you do, you're a student, or you're not a student, you're a CEO, or you're a rugby player, for that may have surface in legitimacy. You can be the object of scrutiny here. You can be the object under assessment. And it's interesting to see how you do. So let's first go to that from an evaluator's point of view. We evaluate the world around us. We watch the news, we look at the television, we talk to each other, we look at Facebook and the other social medias, and we see things and make sense of that. It's a simple sense-making process. Right? So we observe, we make up our mind, and we act. We have an opinion about it. Either we agree or we disagree. Or it leaves us cold and we perceive we're not part of this. I don't have to have an opinion about this. Let's look at these states, because this is our way of kind of assessing the things that we're looking at, these objects of legitimacy. Let's talk about legitimacy first, because that's kind of the obvious one, the clear one. Legitimacy is important, because in this case, the evaluee, that object of legitimacy, attains the highest level of social desirability. So everything is okay, everything is fine. Now start looking around you and try to find an organization that is just not under discussion, in which everything is fine and honky-dory. And we argue in this research that this is kind of an hypothetical state. There is no company, there is no entity that is fully without comments, without critiques. Can you find one? I can't. If you can, please speak. But that's interesting then. Because that basically means that everything in the society, all the companies that we're talking about, has issues. And it's important to know what these issues are. Because it is those issues that we need to address to attain that position as close as possible to legitimacy as we can get it. But what do you need to do? And so let's not ponder too long about legitimacy. This is my hypothetical state, even though it's the ideal state. The state is similar to being healthy. I'm going to the doctor and say, "Doctor, I'm sick, I want to be healthy." Current situation is that people really do not know what then to say. What do you need to do? A doctor will first ask, let me assess you. Let me see what you cough here, do you feel a pain there, is there a pressure there? And he can define how sick you are. And if you have defined how sick you are, you can actually think of a cure. Do you need to be shipped to the hospital straight away, or do you just need to take an aspirin and everything will be fine? And that's what we're going to do with the legitimacy as well. If this is the ultimate state that we want to be, knowing that it's probably a hypothetical state, what do we need to do? So let's talk about, well, this is an example. This guy clearly thought that GMOs were fine. But let's not ponder too much. Let's go to the other extreme, illegitimacy. Illegitimacy is basically everybody says that, you know what? I know you're legal, because we only look at legal businesses here. We're not discussing cocaine or things like that. We only look at legal businesses here. And here everybody really thinks that should not happen. Because if you like that, then you have a bit of an issue. Because it's almost like you're going to go out of business. Because people really don't like your business. And yet there's examples of businesses who actually flourish there. You can think of this. This case, this lady says she doesn't like GMOs. Because we shouldn't touch them. It bothers me that people playing God with our food. I have one. It was today in the news. This is not from today, but the legal highs. Legal highs are these kind of stimulants based on all kind of chemicals that people use to go partying and have a good time. Well, have a good time. They really don't know what they're doing to themselves. This is a flourishing business. People use them out of ignorance, because they don't really know what the results are. Well, they know what the results are, but what the implications are of the use of that. But man, do they sell. And they are legal because we can't prohibit them, because at the moment that we list them on the famous list of prohibited or controlled substances, they find something new. And we get on. So there's an interesting example of this extreme case of illegitimacy that affects us. If you have teenage kids, it will affect you, because maybe they are the ones using it. When they go out tomorrow evening and in the weekend. They may use them. And it may have very serious consequences on their health, on their sanity, right? But we can't only address those companies if we kind of identify them, if you have something to measure them by. And this is not easy. There's this other state of companies that we really don't know. And this is more interesting, because there's a lot of new enterprises, new inventions that haven't gained yet the legitimacy in the eyes of the audience, that we really do not know about. The example that I mentioned before of stem cell research. Really, how many people in the room here can comfortably say, I know what stem cell research is and I know what it means? Are there any? 1, 2? Only 2? That basically means that if I'm the investor or if I'm the entrepreneur, they have an issue. Now what do I do? What do I need to do? Any idea? How can I change this? Because undecided legitimacy basically means that the bank will also say, I actually do not know. It's a high risk in you. And what does it mean if you have a high risk in a finance, when you ask for money? The cost goes up, right? And what you do not have if you are an entrepreneur that is introducing a new technology is money enough. So there's a bit of an issue here. An issue that you will need to deal with. How would you do that? Well, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You need to inform. You need to make sure that you understand why your people don't understand. Which is the part of the message, of the activity that you try to sell, that people don't understand. And in the US, this question of temporal research is a highly contentious discussion. Some presidents say, yes, we allow it, and they let go ahead. And then the next president comes in and says, stop, it's not allowed anymore. Until probably the political climate changes and it is allowed again. Yet most people don't really know. Then there is 2 positions which I call conditional. It could be conditional legitimacy or conditional illegitimacy. Conditional legitimacy is probably the most common state in which you can find yourself. Because most of the organization that we work for, most of the positions that we fill, they will be, we are legitimate, but provided that you do X, Y, or Z. It's fine to be in the alcohol business, or it's fine to sell cigarettes, provided that you do not sell it to minors, for example, or you do not stimulate abuse of it. Then it's okay. And most of the businesses are actually in that. And so as an organization, it's actually really important to find what are these conditions to legitimacy. Because those are the things that you need to address. And you will find probably 1,001 conditions. You need then to start prioritizing. What is the most common condition that we find? What is the most impactful condition that we can find? And how can we address them, little by little? Because you will have to, sooner or later, address these issues or suffer the consequences. Suffer the consequences in lost customers, suffer the consequences in a higher cost of finance, suffer the consequences of name it. But you will have to think about them, and you will need to see which one is most important to address and how to address that. And then you will have to measure, I did try to address it, has it worked? And if not, what else can I do? Do I address it in a different way? And then there's this conditional illegitimacy. That's the other end. A business that is in principle illegitimate, but there are certain cases that it could be allowed. Again, that's one of these tricky ones. But these are interesting ones because these challenge the standing that these organizations have in society. And then there's the last situation, that is when there's just no agreement. When there's just no agreement. So if you look at guns in the States, right? My example here. Guns in the States, you really can't get an agreement. 50% split. Half society says it should be allowed to carry around the gun, and the other half says no way. If you're in that situation with a gun manufacturer, how do you just ignore that as part of half of society? Because how are you going to talk to them? Are you going to try to prove them wrong? But if you try to prove them wrong, you somehow say to the other half of the society that you're doing something wrong that needs to be proven right. Controversy happens all the time. And if it happens to you, how do you deal with it?
Well, that was a very interesting set of slides, interesting slide here, interesting video covering aspects, and we've got a fair few questions. So whilst we're just pondering this poll in a second, Sonia, people have been asking the difference between legalization and legitimacy, and I think that was, maybe you can link that to the cannabis bit. So from your research, how should we understand that difference? What difference does it make, legalizing something versus legitimating it?
Well, first of all, I mean, legitimacy and legality are two different concepts. They can, relate to each other, but not necessarily. I will give an example. We have all heard about the case of a rapist in the US who was condemned only for a 6-month sentence, right? And in that case, the rape is illegal, of course, but the sentence of a judge giving that person 6 months jail is legal, but yet it has raised an uproar all over the world, and so it is highly illegitimate. So we can see that at some point these constructs can be different. And sometimes when something becomes highly illegitimate, the legislator will act on it and make that activity become illegal. For example, we have had in the past, there are certain discussions in certain countries, for example, about abortion. If most of the people think that it's illegitimate, maybe the legislator will make it illegitimate, will make it illegal. So, and for the legalization of cannabis, there might be some part of it where audiences think that it's useful on certain purposes. So something which is viewed as legitimate at some point might change when the legislator makes it become legal.
Okay.
Sure.
So yes, so there's a kind of an interaction between those two ideas, and also the sense of things changing over time. Before we go further in the discussion, let's have a look at poll 1. You can see the questions on the screen. Our technical expert to launch the poll. So on screen will be a pop-up, and you should be able to vote. So the questions are: what steps should you take to better understand the legitimacy of the people you work with, your suppliers, collaborators, and so on? Is it A, very little? Actually, we just basically trust them. B, we do this in a systematic way to checking their legitimacy. C, well, actually, we should spend more effort fact-finding, questioning our assumptions about them. And D, we need to focus and be more aware on the conditions under which we're happy to perceive them as legitimate. So hopefully that poll, you can see that on screen. So feel free to make your vote, and we'll keep that open for a short period of time. Beyond this issue of conditional legitimacy, I think is quite an interesting one, and so can you? And I'm looking at the chat here. Someone talked about financial services, where that's interesting because in some cases they may be behaving in what's perceived as a legitimate way. In other cases, perhaps not legitimate, and the legitimacy may well be conditional. So, what's your view on that particular sector?
Well, on finance and beyond finance, I think it is actually interesting that if you really start looking at this, that full and complete legitimacy is quite hypothetical. If you try to think of any company who has absolutely zero issues, you will probably find that you find very few companies. Louise Gus says it in the chat, and there are some areas where it's practically impossible to be seen legitimate by all, and that's very true. Try to think of any kind of company that is just absolutely fully clean, and so if it's so difficult to think of that, then all companies would almost be conditionally legitimate. The issue then becomes how big are the conditions and how easy they are to deal with, and that is, I think, an interesting thing for us as business practitioners to look into. Is it if we do our business, what are the conditions that we need to take into consideration to be perceived correct and acceptable by the audience?
Okay, yeah. So, and it's interesting. We look at this webinar from the point of view of the evaluators, as we're doing now, and then the evaluees, and obviously there's an interaction between them. I'm just trying to look at for some reason, and I'll talk to my tech expert. For some reason, I can't see the poll results. Either I'm looking in the wrong place. But could I ask Bill to just pop up the poll results in the chat so I can see, please? Oh, right, I can see that here. Right, so we have the results are 50% of people going for item C, spending more effort. 25% item B, answer B. 25% need to be more aware of the conditions. And I'm not sure what the results for A were. No one for A. That's very interesting. So, Sonia, briefly, what do you think about this idea that, it's a surprise that 50% of our respondents say that they should be spending more effort fact-finding and questioning assumptions? Is this what you would expect? Hello, Sonia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, 50% voted for item C there. Is that something you would expect, that people are thinking they should spend more effort fact-finding and questioning assumptions?
Actually, yes, because oftentimes there are certain stereotypes that we think that the judgment is already made and we follow what is on the media, etc. But it doesn't mean that this reflects what individual evaluators are thinking, and that is why it's important, I think, to ask people, individual evaluators, their opinions, because as we can see here, it probably reflects what happens in society, that people are willing to get more information, but the variety of or information sources that they have are usually limited. I think that people are willing to make the cognitive effort to decide.
That's interesting, and again, from a management viewpoint, as practicing managers and leaders, trainers, consultants, or whatever, how much effort should we spend on that? I'll leave that question hanging in midair. Let's move on to the next video, which is really looking at it from the evaluee's viewpoint, so from the organisational viewpoint. So I'm going to ask Bill to advance us, please, to the next video segment. And again, keep the questions flowing. There's lots of chat flowing here. Difficult to keep up with all the points being raised, but that's fantastic. So if we could have the video, please.
Let's turn around the roles now, because we have now talked about us being the judges, us being the evaluators, us casting a judgment on whether activity X, Y, or Z is legitimate or not. But now what happens to you, right? And this has to do with legitimation. And how can I legitimize myself? The process of becoming legitimate. So we argue that there's kind of these three main strategies that you need to choose from. If you're legitimate, you cannot rest and sit down and say, well, is this all fine? We enjoy it whilst it lasts. No, you need to maintain that. You need to continuously prove to society that really what you're doing is correct. And it should be approved and stay with us. And stay with us customers, stay with us investors, and stay with us any kind of stakeholder. Society changes. You need to show that this change doesn't affect your position of legitimacy. And so you need to understand the change and you need to understand how it can affect you. If you're illegitimate, on the other hand, you somehow can only disprove, right? You can only hopefully to stay in business. If you're really perceived on a long term to be illegitimate, it's probably an ending business. Sometime, sooner or later, the law will come up and will turn what is illegitimate into illegal. It will just rule it not possible anymore. And so before that happens, you need to disprove. You need to explain better what you do. You need to explain what you're doing, what the perception is, and why that is not the right perception. And if it's undecided, you need to inform. How do you choose between one and the other one? And I would really keen to hear if there's actually people in the audience who actually do this consciously. Because I don't think you do. But if you do, then prove me wrong. Okay? So if you're actually assessing your standing in society, if you already have a process in place that measures that, you get a judgment, right? And you can do three things. Regardless what the judgment is. But assume that the judgment is you are conditionally legitimate. You can persist. Persist, in other words, you keep on doing what you're doing and you just ignore whatever the opponents say. That's a risky strategy. Because opponents can be like a virus. They can multiply. They can become bigger and bigger and bigger until you really become unknown legitimate or even illegitimate. But if you persist, you can also reaffirm. You need to reaffirm if you're legitimate. You need to disprove if you're illegitimate. Or you need to inform if you're in this unknown legitimacy. What is your practical strategy for that? But that's always where you persist. You don't touch what you're actually doing. You don't change your activity. You can also change your activity. And if you change your activity, you need to say, well, how much do we need to change? You need to assess that. Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to do it slightly different? Or do we need to completely redesign it? Because that's the last decision. If I really can't convince you that what I'm doing is good and should merit the financing, your support, then and I even tweaking help, I just have to change. I have to redesign what I'm doing, or redesign completely the activity from the ground up.
So that poses a bit of a challenge for organisations. And Sonia, I was going to ask you to respond to an idea picked up in the chat here about the fact that the evaluator is there's lots of people, many members of the public, stakeholders, and co. So how is an organisation going to be able to know what all these individual views are, especially if they're shifting? It must be quite an effort, really, to do it properly.
Actually, organizations, should be on the lookout of which voices are most important. Because of course, they cannot address the whole range of differing opinions. So oftentimes what organizations do is that they focus on a certain section of opinions which they think are most important for them, for their survival. So that is why also there are continuous debates about legitimacy, because not everyone can be satisfied with the actions of the organization.
Bjorn, can I ask you to pick up on the point about someone's talking about facts, but this idea of facts versus opinions. I guess the evaluator has to push out facts out there to bolster legitimacy rather than kind of thought pieces or opinions or views. So do you think facts are really important, and is it something that we should spend more time on?
Well, look at the current elections or the Brexit referendum. We are trying to put out, of course, yes, you need to put out facts, because if you put out lies, that will somehow backfire on you sooner or later. Does everybody put out facts? No, by no means. But everybody, by expressing their opinions, by expressing their considerations, try to influence what on one hand the people think about the activity. If I'm the organization, or if I'm the audience, I try to influence that organization to do what I think is right. And if I'm the audience, my way of being heard is by increasing numbers, by trying to the people around me to join together in my mission to make an organization stop doing something. If you think of in the past about what Greenpeace and the likes did to stop the seal hunting, they stopped it by means of the large numbers of people who said this activity is no longer acceptable, it has lost legitimacy, and they managed to stop it. And can you do that by facts only? No, you can do it by lies if you want. The risk of lies is that it may or it will likely backfire on you, so it's best to use the fact.
I'd be fascinated to hear from the audience if anyone's got any examples of people in their organization actually taking some action to do something about their legitimacy. Whilst we're hopefully maybe getting some views on that, let's look at poll 2. So if Bill, you could launch the poll 2, should pop up on your screens. So the question's here about what you should be doing over the next 12 months or so as evaluees. Should it be on A, increasing the efforts to maintain your already established legitimacy and improving it? Should it be B, addressing people's claims about our perceived illegitimate aspects and disproving these, even though we might think we're acting legitimately? Is it C, to go back to Bjorn's earlier point about demystifying for the public what actually the organization does? And we've got a video. The next video perhaps looks at a bit like that, this issue of demystifying a particular industry. Or D, is it actually to have more debate internally? Maybe we're assuming some aspects of legitimacy and we don't discuss it enough. So if we could have your votes on that. So Sonia, before we get the results in, do you have any examples of organizations that have been, that have tried to do this and with some success? Or is it a continuing kind of struggle? We're never actually going to be fully on top of carrying out actions to maintain our legitimacy at 100%?
I think, first of all, having a situation, an organization is never 100% legitimate. There are always, stakeholders who do not necessarily agree with the organization. However, I think that it depends really on what the organization, what is the activity of the organization. And most of the time, organizations, even if they have they are seen as legitimate. I'll give an example of one of the world's, priciest coffee beans. The coffee maker was, Kopi Luwak company, and it was drinking coffee is legitimate. No one questions it. However, when it was found that the coffee, the pricey, very tasty coffee, was made by some kind of little animal which were eating the beans and excreting it, the civet cats, there was an uproar. And the company lost its legitimacy. So I would say that legitimacy, maintaining legitimacy is an ongoing process. When you lack legitimacy, then you have to input more effort in maintaining it, or in gaining or repairing it.
Okay, thank you for that. That links nicely into our poll results. So we're saying that in the poll results we have 36% of you voting for A, and then 27% for D, which is interesting, quite a large number about having that debate internally, and then much lower, 18% for B and C. So, Bjorn, what thoughts do you have about what organisations need to do on D there to perhaps have more debate internally? I mean, should that just be tied into debates about strategy, or should there be separate sort of discussions and discourse about specifically legitimacy within an organisation?
The results of this poll show how important it is to have a discussion like we are having now. Now we're just talking about the at the general level in what it means. So what organizations indeed need to do, they need to start measuring what can harm them now or in the future, and how the public opinion about themselves or their activity or their industry is changing. I was just typing in the chat as William Conesco. I'm not sure why I have that name, but that's me typing. Look what happened to Volkswagen. Volkswagen now has stirred a bit of a mess about their diesel debacle. But now even companies like BMW and Toyota and any other car manufacturer need to start thinking, what do we do with this new perception of diesel engines? How is it affecting us? And that's a serious debate. And that is something that companies, the better that they work it out, the better they realize what is threatening them on the horizon, the better they will be able to prepare themselves, and the better they will be able to prepare the message that they were going to give to the audience to show that whatever issues coming up, that they are not part of it, and that they are clean, and they maintain their legitimacy.
That's interesting, and I guess when we're looking at the industry level, just picking up a question from Monique, if you see other organisations, institutions adopting the same positions, as confirmation that our legitimacy, that we're in tune with the legitimacy. So maybe the Volkswagen thing might be stimulating a debate across all car industries about this. So I guess there's an industry type of effect, I guess.
The case of Volkswagen is interesting because it has triggered several debates. It has triggered a debate of Volkswagen as an organization, that we normally know as a very reliable car manufacturer. It has stirred discussions about the technology of diesel by Volkswagen and by anybody else. It even has now stirred the discussion on how reliable the German industry as a whole. Maybe there's an issue. So there's several areas where organizations now have to start thinking to what extent may public opinion affect them and may harm them, and what do they need to do to counter that.
Okay, thank you very much, Bjorn. We're going to move on to the final video, which is looking at legitimacy in the context of the pharmaceutical sector, which I think will be fascinating for most of you, because it will hopefully demystify the nature and complexity of that sector. So, Bill, could we launch video 3, please?
Basically, what constitutes pharmaceutical medicine, and how does that sit within pharma? So, medicine is the discipline concerned with the development of something that as humans, as us, we can actually take to make us better. So, and it looks at everything from that discovery through the development, through the monitoring and the aspects, as it says here, of the marketing of that medicine. So all the way through this process, and William touched on this, there is a lot of legitimacy that has to be looked at. At its core is research and development, so that is what we do. Now within that whole sector of pharma and pharmaceuticals, you've got research and development, so that's us as a CRO. You've got the client, or what I call the client, so they are the people that will give us the molecule. So they are the people like Reckitt Benckiser, AstraZeneca, GSK, Pfizer, lots of different people, right down to the likes of Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Nestle. Lots and lots of different clients. And then, as William was saying before, there's then the healthcare side, so the actual patients. So pharma isn't just one sector. it's actually 3 that merge into one sector because they're very, very different areas. Now, if I was to speak to people who didn't really know a lot about pharma, they wouldn't know that. So again, very, very split. As we were talking about before, as William was talking about, I thought it might be quite interesting for you to look at the actual stages of making a medicine. So we might be given 1 million molecules at the beginning of the year, and I'll use a 12-month period. So in the first 12 months, we might be given 1 million molecules. Those 1 million molecules over a period of time, and this period of time can be anything between 10 and 15 years. 10 and 15 years to take that molecule through to a medicine. Patents on these medicines are for 20 years. So when, before on the video, we were talking about GMOs, and we don't really understand that much about GMOs, actually there's a lot of research that goes on behind the GMO that people just aren't aware of because people don't talk about it. So we're given 1 million molecules. 5 years down the line, we're doing some research and development on those molecules. Maybe we decide that only 250 of those molecules can move forward to the next stage of those molecules becoming a medicine. Only 250. So 750 are thrown away. Cost a lot of money. Then as we move forward, so we move into things like clinical trials, which we've all heard about, some of the things that have happened in the past. As we move forward then into clinical trials, you might find that out of that 1 million, only 5 get to the clinical trial stages. Lots and lots of development. So by this time, you could be up to year 10. Then as it's going through the different phases, so phase 2, phase 3, right up to sort of the general sort of approval stage, you could be looking at only 1 molecule out of 1 million that actually hits the market and becomes a medicine, because somewhere down those lines, they've actually been removed because they haven't been deemed as being suitable to become what people want it to become. Huge amount of research that goes into it. And then, of course, we have the approval. So people like the FDA, the Home Office are involved, the MHRA, lots and lots of different people. And it doesn't finish there. You've then got the life of the medicine, which is phase 4, which is that continual phase of those medicines as they hit the market. Now, how many people knew that? How many people thought you could start with 1 million and actually end up with 1? Think of the money that these organisations are actually spending, which then takes it back to the patents of how important it is to actually make sure that these medicines work. And if they don't work, they are removed and something new is actually developed behind it. So why the controversy? So why is the controversy within what we do? So general pharma, so that's R&D and sort of end stage. So for me, the controversy that sits behind sort of my business and the business that I work for, the business that I'm very, very passionate about. I've taken some of the medicines that we've dealt with. I'm very, very passionate about what I do, as are my colleagues. Animal rights, conspiracy, failed clinical trials, lack of understanding, which is my biggest, off-label promotions, and that inadequate manufacturing practices. This is just some of the controversy. And for me, all that controversy sits behind people do not really have the understanding, because in the past, pharma has been kept very cloak and dagger. People haven't really liked to talk about it. There is, again, we keep going back to this lack of understanding. People need to talk more about it. People need to understand what pharmaceuticals are all about, from the development right the way through to actually the medicines coming out and actually being taken by patients. So this is us. I thought it'd be quite interesting. Kelvins Laboratories. So we say we're one of the largest clinical research organisations by revenues. We are actually the largest now on a global basis. We generate the most safety and efficacy data that is regulated within the industry. So from a quality perspective, from a regulatory compliance perspective, we are the people that are generating the information that all our clients are using, inevitably, is helping people get better on a day-to-day basis. whether that be through the doctors, through an ointment, through a medicine over a counter, or whilst people are in hospital. So cancer drugs, Alzheimer's, you name it, these are all the sorts of things that we are working on a constant basis. So we support and develop over 1/3 of the prescribed medicines, and back in 2014 we worked on 34 of only 39 drugs that went into the market. So by far a market leader. So only 39 drugs went into market, 34 of those we actually worked on, or we worked on for our clients. We're the market leader in toxicology and central laboratory services, so that's very much around animal welfare and the work that we're doing with our animals, and obviously our central laboratory services. We're a top 5 provider of phase 1 to 4 clinical development services, which of course you're probably sat on one of those clinical trials at the moment. And as Kelvins, we operate in over 30 countries with employees in over 60. So a big, big organisation. We've got about 12,500 employees as Kelvins. And back in 2015, we actually merged with a corporation called Laboratory Corporation of America. 48,000 employees, 240 main sites, and 1,800 offshoot sites that they have. Massive, massive organisation all around clinics, laboratories, and making people healthier. That's us. So legitimacy, Bijan touched on this. For me, my definition is doing the right thing in the right way without doing any harm. For me, saying what you do means that you are able to prove what you do. Be truthful and think about your ethics and your morals and how they impact. So where Bijan was talking before about actually when you look at legitimacy, is it legitimacy of me that as Kelvins people look at, or is it the legitimacy of that whole, that business? For me, it's the legitimacy of the people that work within Kelvins, because we're all passionate to do things in the right way to ensure that we're not doing harm. So morals, ethics, regulatory compliance, and legislation, key to what we do. So for me, you need to think, what is your definition of legitimacy? Is it as simple as truth? Is it as simple as the way that you were brought up? So the morals and ethics that your parents have taught you. Think about as students, what's the legitimacy that you're really, really sort of in the frame for? Plagiarism. That's legitimacy. Think about data protection. Facebook. Oh, my worst nightmare. But I do have an account. But again, you know, data protection, plagiarism within what we're doing, just that whole piece around social technology at the moment, masses and masses of information out there. How do you make it legitimate? How legitimate is it? And again, what is your definition? Because until you understand what your definition of legitimacy is, how do you then put that into practice within your day-to-day lives? Whether it be if you're just a student, whether you're at a business, how does your legitimacy then affect what you're doing in your working life? Whether you're a student at university, whether you're, whatever you're doing, even if you're just walking down the street. Everything that we do needs to be legitimate.
Well, that was a really interesting video segment that certainly, for me, and I suspect most of you, kind of demystified the pharma industry. So when we have views about a particular industry, I suppose, even as evaluators, we need to sort of find out. But I think as Bjorn has put in the chat, you know, the pharma industry also need to get out there and tell people. But looking at this poll here, which we'll come to right away, this builds on the point that Lucy made in the video, that it's about our own legitimacy. It's down to us, individually, collectively, in our organisation. So let's look at the question here. So in defining your own or our own legitimacy, what are the most important aspects to clarify, to promote and make aware to other people? Is it about our morals and ethics? Again, in the organizational context, this is. Is it about, for example, our ability to comply with regulations, and even, again, at a personal level, whether we, it may be examples of our own behavior? Is it about, C, our motivations and intentions to do good for society? Indeed, that might clash with other statements of organizational purpose. Or should we be clarifying and promoting our track record, our past, what we've actually done? So if we could launch that poll and get a few comments, some votes on that. Sonia, looking at this individual type of aspect, how does that fit with the organizational context? Because especially in large organizations, you may have a large number of decision makers who've got very different views about their own legitimacy, yet that has to be some kind of consensus, I guess. Hello, Sonia?
Yes.
Oops.
Yes. Everything's fine, so I heard you very well.
Okay, okay.
I was saying that in this context, within organizations, the approach is different because here we're talking about internal legitimacy of an organization within, I mean, the employees, the managers getting together and speaking with the same voice within in order to be able to project a concordant voice externally to garner external legitimacy. So there needs to be an alignment between the internal legitimacy of the organization as they define themselves within and externally.
That's a very good point there about alignment. And let's link that into the poll results which we've now got. So this is quite interesting. So 50% of you have gone for item C. Promoting a greater clarity about our motivations and intentions. And the next is item A, about our own morals or ethics. And C gets, so B gets 16%, compliance with regulations. And interestingly, D, only 11%. Only 11%, yet many organizations make a lot of that. So, Bjorn, what's your thoughts about item C there, answer C, which has got 50%? Does this kind of mesh in with what your findings are telling you?
Well, what my expected findings would be yes, because look, it says our motivation and intention to do good for society means, to a large degree, that we comply with regulations and that what we do is moral and ethical, right? So yes, it seems like ultimately we need to make sure that we are in line what society expects us to do, and at a very high level, what society wants us to do is to be a good citizen, and we need to just provide evidence that we are that, and that we do not overcharge. But going to the discussion that is taking place in the chat, right, about the cost level of medication. It is. I don't think that the audience will have an issue with medication being expensive, provided that they understand all the investment that are required to do so. I think the problem of the pharma industry, and that was part what we learned in the discussion that we had later on from Lucy. The lady in the video, is that the pharma hasn't been very open about that. And it is therefore understandable that the audience thinks that these medicines are too expensive. People can't afford them, and particularly those who most need them are least able to afford them. And so the pharma has to do a better job in informing how they are contributing to society and how they are being a good member of society.
Okay, that's interesting. And again, looking at the previous discussion in the chat about the automotive industry, so those are two very interesting industries with different sort of dynamics. And I'm sure many of our attendees are from smaller industries. So, Sonia, can I just get your view on this poll? And again, if we look at maybe the smaller organizations, what do you think the implications are then for how individuals and individual managers and smaller organisations could be more effective in promoting their own kind of legitimacy?
I think that somehow it might be, it's a double-edged sword for smaller organizations, because on one hand, it might be easier to, align the internal legitimacy of smaller organizations with the external legitimacy, because there are less dissensions within the organization. That's one thing. On the other hand, I think that a smaller organization has also probably less resources in order to address contested legitimacy claims. So I think it's really done case by case. It really depends on the organization, and that's why legitimacy is so dynamic that it evolves continuously. I wanted to just say something about the pharmaceutical contestations about this industry. I think that part of the issues regarding the prices are also linked to the fact that there are certain companies which propose generic medications, and the fact that certain pharmaceutical groups, sue the companies which propose generic medications. This is seen as something which is not ethical or moral. I think that part of the debate about the pricing of medications also lies in that.
That's again, bringing it back to the ethical dimension. This is a very complex topic, this whole thing, legitimacy, ethics, legalisation, and the shifting sort of dynamics. We're getting towards the end of our time here, so I'm just going to move to the next slide, and really a final opportunity to kind of wrap these points up. So I'm going to ask you, Sonia, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just to pick out one or two key ideas or thoughts that have come over the last hour. What is it that you would advocate that perhaps we could or should be doing? Are there some neglected areas that we could focus on to improve our legitimacy?
Indeed, I think that as evaluators, we should look for more information and try to understand what are the messages, what are the underlying reasons for the messages that we're getting in society. And as evaluees, as members, as managers, as employees of organizations, actually thinking about legitimacy, because I'm not sure that in every organization today, managers, etc., think about this concept. I think it exists, these problems exist, but we need to be aware of them and think about them.
And that's
I think the main takeaway I would have from this, being aware, raising awareness and thinking about it.
That's really interesting. And there's interesting final comments here coming through on the chat. Richard here talks about vehicle safety and how the same product can be seen as legitimate in the UK but not acceptable somewhere else. So I guess if you're in an international context, you have to work even harder. Bjorn, I'm not sure. I don't know if Bjorn is back in.
I'm trying to get. I'm running out of battery in my telephone very, very badly. So if I'm interrupted, then please forgive me.
That's fine. So, Bjorn, what are your final thoughts then on this topic?
Look, I think what is of crucial importance that we get this conversation more explicit in the way we run our businesses, and that is something that I've seen coming up in the chat as well. I think we need to be implementing some explicit process of identifying what the conditions to legitimacy are for companies big and small. Because having legitimacy is just not only important how the bank sees us, but it's also important how our customers sees us and how our investors sees it and how potential employees will see us. So it's important that we are aware of it and that we deal with any issues as good as we can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bjorn. You've really, yourself and Sonia, both really put this subject on the table, and it would be really interesting to see the results of as your research moves towards its end stages. So let's move on. A couple of final slides to remind you what's next. The next Business Perspective event is on Wednesday, the 21st of September. Interesting topic there, strategy matters, leveraging business models in times of a global disruption. And is there any end to this disruption? I don't know, but we seem to be in a permanent state of kind of disruption or crises. That's the new normal. So you can register for that now. Also, you can get in touch. We've got the email address here. We've got the various LinkedIn groups, and you can look at the Business Perspectives blog. So feel free to continue the conversation. And finally, it remains for me to just thank very much indeed, a very big thank you to Sonia for your contribution, and thank you to Bjorn.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you, and thank you very much indeed to Bill and the Workcast technical team. So, and thank you to all our participants for joining. I know most of you are probably alumni. The figure's now 90,000, which is really quite amazing. It's going up by another 10 or so every few years. So well done. Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your evening. So that's a wrap for now. Thank you.